What is going on, everyone? Anthony here, and welcome back to another video here on Let's Talk Resident Evil. And in today's video, we are going to discuss the rapid fire interview that was done by Game Informer while they were over there playing the game and getting a bunch of coverage on it. This was their last bit of coverage, and the rapid fire interview brings up a lot of stuff that we already know. And there's also a lot of silly and goofy questions in there too. So in this video, I'm basically going to tell you all the takeaways that they talked about, and of course some of it is answers we might have already known, but it's cool to get the confirmation from the devs themselves. So let's get right into it. The first thing they talked about was the village being expanded, having more areas to explore, and they said yes. You know, this is something where it is a big and grand scope that they're trying to build this game on. And of course, with the RE engine, we know that there is going to be a lot more of a depth to this. There's going to be a lot more detail. There's going to be a lot that they can do that couldn't be done back in 2005. And the village being a crucial part to being your gateway into Resident Evil 4, being your entry point into Resident Evil 4, making the village as iconic as it was in the original was probably a challenging task, and I'm sure, judging from the looks of it, they did a really good job at capturing how it used to be with giving it that RE engine twist and remaking it the way that we envisioned it, which is staying true to what was there and just making it have that modern spin that the fans really wanted. And that's one thing they even said in their interview when they talked to Mr. Stewart about all this stuff, about them trying to take on that task and how much of a risk it was, where they didn't even really want to do it because it was taking on such a gigantic game like Resident Evil 4. So that goes on to the whole expansion here of, you know, the system of trading, the system of, you know, having different things into the merchant, having that whole mechanic. And of course, with animal meats, they kept that the same because they asked about the whole egg situation with the snakes. And they said, well, there's snake meat this time. And it's interesting, they mentioned in that interview too that they always, you know, envision them as snake eggs, where we call them chicken eggs. And there's even a chicken egg charm that you can get in this upcoming remake, which makes any healed egg a full heal. So it's funny that they both mentioned that. But yeah, snake meat, it's something that you can now get on your roster for stuff that Leon has to get for different resources and all that stuff. Now, another thing that was mentioned in this interview was the Hookman. They asked if the Hookman will return flat out, and they said no. But the one thing they mentioned was, you know, the history of it, that it was something that was out of the hallucination biohazard, which is what they called that version of Resident Evil 4, or Biohazard 4 over there. And it was a snapshot in time. You know, we saw that with Leon fighting the Hookman, coming out of the painting, you know, the doll heads being creepy and you know, coming to life and falling over. There was a lot of different things in that early Resident Evil 4 version, and the talks of the Hookman was always something that fans just wanted to see, such as myself. That would have been cool if they worked him in some way, but of course that was a different time, a different era, and it is confirmed by the devs he is not returning. Now, something that is kind of returning but not really, and this is something where QuickTime events were brought up here. And when you read the Game Informer magazine, the print that is going to be, you know, actually mailed out to everybody, is something they said on the social media that people are finally getting their physical prints of it, right? I read it digital myself just to obviously report on it, but they talked about QuickTime events not really being in there. QuickTime events not being in the game itself with the actual cinematics, because we know there's QuickTime events when you parry, there's QuickTime events when you have to evade the cow, bullman, whatever you want to call them. So those button prompts are there. But when asked if there were QTEs in this, they said almost no QTEs, no. And I think when they mention that, they're mostly talking or referring to cinematic cutscene QTEs. I don't think they will be present in this game. It will just be in-game button prompts that you have to press, not so much like, you can't put down your controller when there's a cutscene. None of that stuff. Now that kind of leads to a couple things that I'm going to bring up in a little bit here when I get down to that point. But the next thing was the topic of stalker enemies. Is there going to be a stalker enemy? And they kind of like said no, but they were kind of like, it kind of just said like, we'll see, but we're not going to tell you today, that kind of thing. So I wonder if they're tiptoeing around that, or maybe the Big Cheese has a presence as a stalker enemy more in the first part of the village that we don't see. I'm curious to see what you guys think. Their reaction, though, kind of said like, you can tell they were kind of saying, I don't know. And they were kind of biting their tongue a little bit. That's kind of the vibe I got, but they didn't really confirm or deny, but, they just kind of said, we'll wait and see, which means it could easily be in there. Now, the question of New Game Plus came up as well in the interview, which I think that was kind of a no-brainer. New Game Plus is going to be in Resident Evil. That's kind of what we expected. When asked about the scariest enemy in Resident Evil 4 Remake, they said Regenerators and the Regenerators, which obviously confirms that they're coming back. But the fact that they also said the Regenerator definitely has me excited because, in my opinion, that is the scariest moment of Resident Evil 4. They're still terrifying, and I even love the Regenerators. I love the whole, not being able to see, but he can hear your every move, and he can really stab the shit out of Leon if you're not paying attention, especially when you have to verse 2 at once, which I hope they keep for the Regenerators section. So one makes its appearance in the castle, in the basement, and the other on the Regenerator side is coming from the island. So hopefully we see these redone and in a good way where it really holds the integrity of the original, and it really has that creepy factor that really made the Regenerators one of the most memorable parts of Resident Evil 4. And when anyone talks horror and more scary and darker, that's kind of what they bring up about this remake. It still has action, but there's still horror in there. And when I think horror in the original Resident Evil 4, the first thing I go to is the Regenerators and the Iron Maidens. So let's go on to the next point. This is something that I really was bummed when they said this, and I really wanted them to do this, and that is the Resident Evil 4 chainsaw controller. Was it considered? And they said it wasn't something that, was able to happen with the development, but it's something they wanted to do, and I was just like, come on, make it happen with development. Like, someone can do this. You can pay a team to do this, but I understand there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of stuff that needs to be done. But the collector in me wants that chainsaw controller, especially because I never got my hands on an original GameCube or PS2 Resident Evil 4 chainsaw controller back in the day. And I was always kicking myself for doing that because I would see it in EB Games and GameStop back then. And now it's obviously a lot more money. But damn, I wish they went back and considered the chainsaw controller. Another thing they brought up was the enemies. They will look a little bit different. They'll have new looks. They didn't mention any more new enemies. Now, of course, we know that the Cowman was added at the very end of development because they felt like there wasn't enough variety or, as much of a new surprise to some of the players. So that might mean they went back and obviously changed the designs of probably some of the boss fights, probably some of the final forms of the Ganados or different variations of that. And the Lost Plagas, they can do a lot with those designs. And I think they definitely hinted at different enemy designs and looks, so I'm curious to see if that applies to the Regenerators, Regenerators, and so on and so forth. There's so many that they can kind of reinterpret, but still keep that, factor that played into the original, which made them scary. Now, with the different layers of character that we always talk about, what are they going to explore? And the one thing they mentioned specifically in this interview was Salazar, and that he has expanded even more on the files and the lore within the game. So taking your time to read the files is always a thing that we love in Resident Evil, right? We always love to find out about the characters, and Salazar already has a very interesting past and history in the original game. So I'm really curious to see what they end up doing with Salazar. The castle is my favorite section in the original Resident Evil 4, and I can't wait to see what they're actually going to show. A funny question like, is the castle going to be in this game was asked in this interview, but judging from the screenshots, we clearly know that that's the case, so that wasn't anything new. But I can't wait to see the castle, and I can't wait to see Salazar, and even see the back and forth between Salazar and Leon. You know, once he kind of invades the radio calls in the castle and stuff like that. Like, I can't wait to see that back and forth, because I'm sure Leon will still have his little quips he'll throw in there. And the Salazar thing is always cool, so I'm really curious to see if other parts of the Los Illuminados will get that expanded story. You know, maybe we'll see. And another thing that they mentioned was the church puzzle, the color puzzle that makes the insignia, is still in this game. So puzzles are still going to be in the spots where we probably remember them. To solve them, will they make them a little bit different? Perhaps. Maybe they might not make them so similar to how they were, but maybe they'll have those puzzles in those locations. There wasn't many in Resident Evil 4, but they'll probably implement more in the remake, considering we saw some in the side quest already from the Chapter 5 gameplay, so we know that's going down. Now, this next bit of info is actually really cool to hear them say. They asked straight up about Krauser. Will Jack Krauser be in the game? And they said yes, he will be in the game. He will be returning. This is from the devs themselves now, but they said that Krauser is still into knife fights. Well, you know what that means, chat room. Knife fights, knife parry system, barely any QTEs for actual cinematic cutscenes. These will all be in-game now. So all those events that will happen will be button prompts and QuickTime events within the game, and be using the knife parry system in-game. So that will be a super fun way to have that modernized Krauser fight, along with more of a Krauser fight, because they're saying here that he's even more powerful than before. So he's powered up and there's more action this time. So is a lot of the action going to come from multiple fights that we get with Krauser again on the island? Maybe. I think there's going to be a lot of things that we don't see coming with Krauser, especially with his relationship and past with Leon. Now, we know that Krauser himself does have a final form, right? But we don't know what that will look like, and if he'll even be more overpowered than before. We'll see. I doubt it'll be as easy as being able to knife him on the rooftop like in the original game. So I'm curious to see what they do with Jack Krauser. Now, the one thing they mentioned here is about the dead dog, and they said that you would have to pretty much do a DNA test to see if it's the same dog from the original. You know what I mean? They kind of danced around that a bit and said, it might not be what it seems. And that's what they hinted at in the article in the magazine as well. So I'm sure that we get that dog that helps Leon. It's just not going to be the same dog that we saw dead in the bear trap. There's probably something that you can find on a side quest, something that's probably off the beaten path that makes it a little bit, you know, easier to miss, and makes it so where the El Gigante fight might not be as easy if you don't go and explore and find the dog. So maybe he's there, but he's just hidden a little bit further in there. We'll see. The whole "I know you'd be fine if you landed on your butt" line was cut. They said Leon doesn't say anything like that, which again, like, I don't really care. That was just kind of like a throwaway line. I don't even think about that line when I play the original. Plus, it also doesn't make sense, because why would you randomly jump down with Ashley and grab her arm and jump blindly into this garbage disposal with going right into a fight? I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I don't care. Like, that's fine. The one thing that's worth noting in this interview is Mike is back. Yes, we got Mike back. They joked around and said he doesn't have an arc or anything like that, but he is back and he is making an appearance, probably helping Leon with some helicopter action towards the back half of the game when you're getting shot at with a bunch of stuff. So we'll see if Mike lasts a little bit longer, or if his fate will be as many other helicopters in the Resident Evil franchise. Another thing they confirmed is the photo mode. So for the first time, we're actually going to be getting a photo mode in this, and that's actually going to be really cool to take different screenshots, do different things, especially if you're making content. It gives you a lot of cool different things to kind of mess around with different thumbnails and just different screenshots for wallpapers. I always love video games that have that photo mode, and I know it's something that some designers, you know, enable in their games, but this is something really cool that they're adding. Again, might not mean a lot to everybody, but this is still cool for fans to check out. They did mention the island in this interview, and they said the island is the same size. They did remake it, but it's not an expanded island. So I'm curious to see how the turn of events play out on the island, and if the pacing will still be the same, because in my opinion, that's when the pacing got a little wonky in the original. So I'm curious to see how they lay everything out in the island. Again, the island has those horror elements with the Regenerator, right? So I'm curious to see where that is in the island and when it comes up, and if it's still in that same order. because there's a little bit of, of a weird balance of action and horror on that side of the game. I wonder if they're going to bake in those horror elements even more this time around, which would be really cool. They did mention the 2 officers in the beginning of Resident Evil 4 that we remember seeing, escorting Leon into the village and everything like that. Now, according to the gameplay, we don't really get any of that. They actually are separated. You find their dead bodies in different areas, one being in the cabin and one being still burned at the bonfire, just like in the original. Now, we still might get that sequence where they're transporting Leon into this part of Spain, but that might be something we only see in the intro cutscene. Maybe we don't see it at all. I'm curious to see how they line that up. We know that they don't last very long, but that's still pretty cool that they mentioned that they kind of changed them up a little bit. Ada Wong was asked about in this interview and whether or not she's still in there and plays an important role, and they said yes and yes. She's still in there, still plays an important role. Hopefully we get separate ways. I can't wait to see if they do something like that and they wrap the chapters around each other and we get the full Ada story. She does play a big role in Resident Evil 4, and she's one of my favorites in the original. So to see more Ada, I'm all for it, and hopefully we get some more separate ways that gives us a little insight to Ada's perspective. So let me know what you think in the comments down below on the brand new Resident Evil 4 Remake rapid fire interview, and let me know what you think of the bits of info that we got. Some of the stuff, again, was stuff we already knew, but it's still cool to hear from the devs themselves. So don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe if you're new, and stay tuned as the road to Resident Evil 4 Remake continues.